Hello everyone, it's me HawkeyeG, and I'm here with another video for you. This time I'm going to cover as many of the changes from Total War Warhammer Game 2 to Game 3 as I can. The idea here is to get more people informed and on board with all of these changes before Immortal Empires drops so that people can jump right in and be ready to play. This means I'll be talking about things like user interface, campaign gameplay changes, and battle gameplay changes. There are some changes which kind of fall into more than one category, so we'll talk about them in between when we get to them. I'll be jumping back and forth between games for these demonstrations as well, and sometimes between factions, so I'll do my best to make it clear where we are and what we're talking about. With that being said, let's get started. First thing I'll be talking about are some of the user interface changes between the two games. While there have been several user interface changes in Warhammer 3, and I'm sure I'll miss some of them, there's one that I want to start with that I think is actually pretty interesting. This is the movement points readout on the movement range bar. Now for those who remember, in Warhammer 2 they added an indicator showing what percentage movement you had remaining. You can see that here in the bottom left. I have to hold the movement button in order to get it to show. But it shows you that percentage movement you have remaining to help ascertain whether you can encamp or not, whether you can use ambush stance, whatever stance you're trying to use. This little bar will help tell you what percentage you have left remaining. Now in Warhammer 3, it's been taken a step further, and it might actually reveal something important about some of the game's inner working. So I'm playing as Inkari for Slaanesh here, and you can see that I have two separate values on my movement range reader. One is the percentage, and the other is what I've called movement points. The interesting thing that I want to point out right now is that available stances are based on the movement points, not the remaining percentage, and we can prove that real quick with a demonstration. So encamp stance takes 50% to use, right? You can see we have 53 out of 122 movement points, but 44% movement remaining. So I'm under 50%, which it says right here, campaign movement range penalty, despite the fact that I don't have 50% campaign movement range. I can still use this because it only costs me 50 points, bringing me down from 53 to 3, and allows me to encamp. So it's certainly a nice little change, and it also makes me wonder if this also existed in Warhammer 2, but we just couldn't see it. It would certainly explain all those times people have had more than 50% movement range, but found themselves unable to encamp. There's also one more thing I want to add, and that is that we can actually move while we are in encamp stance now, which is just a nice little quality of life update. You can see I'm in encamp stance right now, and I'm moving. And so we don't have to kind of, despite the fact that we have the information to not get caught out of encamp stance unintentionally, we also don't even have to worry about it because we can just stay in encamp stance and move. So that's kind of nice. Another user interface update that's a bit smaller is the ability to toggle hero details. In Warhammer 2, the menu for a hero is contextual. We have a hero in the army, we see their stats page. We have a hero on the campaign map, we see their campaign map abilities. We can't switch between either one of them though, so if we want to remember what abilities a hero has, we might have to go into their skills page and take a look. In Warhammer 3, however, we have a button to toggle between this menu regardless of whether we have a hero in an army or a hero on the campaign map. So no matter where your hero is or what they're doing, you can get a quick refresh on, what are they good at or what are they used for on the campaign map. Maybe not the most important change of all time, but certainly convenient, especially if you forget which hero has casualty replenishment and which one assassinates. Additionally, now, when we want to go into the details or skills page for a lord, we can actually see that they've got a nice, very organized readout of the menu up here on top. In Warhammer 2, there is no such menu. You just kind of have to click through and hope that they're in order. But you can see as I click through, it's actually in order here of which heroes are attached to which army. You can see these heroes all have this little line indicating that they are attached to that lord's army. So it's a lot easier to kind of scroll through different units and get to see where they are, what they're attached to, what they're doing. The idea is that it's much easier to see and select these characters from up here and be sure, which characters you're looking at and which armies they're a part of. The last piece for focusing on user interface changes is now that we have a more explicit readout of diplomacy and negotiation values. This means that we have a good deal more information on what is influencing someone's opinion of a deal and why, and perhaps what we can do to change it. So where in Warhammer 2, we would simply see these deals labeled as chance of success to be high, moderate, or low, if I select it, I can actually get a readout on what all of the factors are that are determining it. Of course, we don't necessarily always have all the details. What does baseline evaluation mean? How is relative faction strength calculated? But it at least gives us a better idea of why they like us or don't like us, what they think of the deal, why they agree with it or disagree with it, and so we have a lot more details there. It's a feature that has been added in some of the more recent Total War games, and there are of course some nice things about having it here. It also helps transition nicely into my next subject, which is more focused on the actual user experience and gameplay of the campaign itself. Not only can we see what value the AI has attributed to a deal, we can also automatically balance the deal with the press of a button now. Gone are the days of adding 300 gold to a deal that says maybe, and then not getting it, and then adding 300 more gold to the deal that still says maybe, and then still not getting it, and then doing that again and again, 20 more times, only to not get the deal through. You want the deal to get done, but you have they have negative attitude towards it. Well, if you have the money to make it work, you just click that button and it puts in pretty much exactly the amount of money that you need to make it work. Look at that. There's also a new feature here that we've seen in previous games, the Quick Deals options. This is a separate menu in the diplomacy window where we can select the Quick Deal button, and then we can search and sort factions which are willing to or are closest to accepting different types of diplomacy deals. Because these lists are filtered, say by people who can't trade at all, or even if they have good standing with your faction, or people who you already have those deals with, it helps narrow the list quite a bit so that you can make decisions more easily. And it allows you to simply move forward with the deal immediately if you should so choose, or you can set it up and modify it further if you like. Continuing with the diplomacy changes, we've also seen a large number of updates to features surrounding defensive and military alliances. In fact, there's an entirely separate menu for this now, and it has its own whole set of options, so let's take a look at that. When you have a defensive or military alliance with another player, you have access to this war coordination menu, and in here we have further options available to us. We have a currency called allegiance points, as it says here, how much support this ally is willing to give you. It's basically used for purchasing shared units and requesting control of their army, so we'll talk about that in a bit. You of course have a more specific menu here of being able to select targets. You can select a target for them to help defend, you can select a target for them to help attack, and we can see here that it will actually cost us allegiance to set these targets, but so you have a more clear menu for it here. We also have the request army option, which would allow me to actually take control of this army for a given period of time and be able to do whatever I want with it. So obviously a very powerful feature. Again, anybody who's struggled with getting your ally to actually move on an objective, or let's say you want to bring their balance of power down so you have the advantage in diplomacy, or let's say that you really just need them to take a loss that will be favorable to both of your campaigns overall, but how are you going to get them to commit to it? Well, now that you have that option, it's going to still be somewhat restricted, and of course I have 100 allegiance points, which is quite a bit, but you have this option now. It's very interesting, very useful, has a lot of different applications. I don't have access to the ally missions on this, unfortunately, and I could try to dig through, but I think it's fairly simple to explain. This is one of the more basic options. Essentially what happens is anytime something's happening to them, whether they're getting attacked by somebody or a settlement needs defending, they'll give you a mission. Generally, this will be to defeat an enemy army or to attack an enemy settlement, and you'll get a small amount of bonus allegiance points for completing it. And then the last option we have here to talk about is creating outposts. So what this does is lets you set up a little, a base, essentially a garrison actually, in one of their capital settlements, as long as there's not already an outpost there. And it also allows you to recruit various units from this faction. So if I cancel construction, we can get a good look at it here. We actually give them casualty replenishment and a small garrison boost for having this outpost in here. The level that you can bring this to is also limited based on whether you're in a defensive or military alliance. I believe you need the military alliance to get it past level 1. But so you can see here, at level 1, you could get a selection of units from the faction's local recruitment. So whatever they have available to them, you can recruit. Of course, this works across different races, so I could make an allegiance with the dwarves or with the Empire and get some of their line holders or some of their artillery if I so wanted to do that. Of course, at level 1 we can only recruit from local recruitment, but at tier 2 we can get from global recruitment, and then at tier 3 we don't have as significant of a cost for getting these units if we are outside of their territory. Now that menu just shows up as another button here on your army selection page, and if we have the right ally selected, you can see, we've got the level 2 outposts, so we technically have access to their global recruitment. And you can see a lot of these are going to take a pretty short period of time, 1 to 2 turns on a lot of stuff that would normally take longer, especially for global recruitment. But we can also see that since it's only a level 2 outpost, some of these allegiance costs are pretty expensive, and you can only have a limit of up to 4 units from any given ally within a single army. Still a really, really interesting system, and going to have a lot more applications when we get into Immortal Empires, being able to cross units between different armies. But those, I think, are the most important changes to talk about when it comes to this war coordination menu. Is more than just war coordination. It's a lot of different things. So it's very important to know about this. It makes defensive and military allies a lot more useful and a lot more valuable and interesting to interact with in this game. It's also a lot of new features to take in. So much so that people who had early access to the game could make a brief video entirely on the topic itself. But if you missed those videos when they came around, I hope that this helped you to better understand those features, and I think they're going to play a much more significant role in Immortal Empires map, like I said. By the way, if you're enjoying this video yourself, consider leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel. I really enjoy this game series, and I'm looking forward to the release of Immortal Empires with great anticipation, so you can be sure I'll be making more videos like this one for it, as well as other guides focused on factions, campaigns, and other strategies related to the game. Having said that, we still have a couple more gameplay changes to talk about before we start shifting to the battle-related items. Now, these aren't nearly as significant as the changes to alliances, but I still think that they're worth pointing out. For one, we now have the ability to automatically distribute skill points as well as automatically managing settlements. So if I were to look at the skill points for this character, you can see that I have a checkbox for auto-assigning skill points. This is a great option for when you're in the late game and you have way too much stuff to manage and you kind of don't care. It's also a great option for when you have a hero at a high level and you've already unlocked most, if not all, of their skills, and you just don't care to, fill in the gaps of what's missing. You can let the game do that for you. Now, I personally don't use these too much because, of course, I like to have manual control, especially over my provinces and with heroes as they develop. But like I said, heroes will eventually reach a point where it doesn't matter, and if you feel like you have too much territory to control, especially once you get towards the late game, you have the ability to automatically construct buildings. You are able to select a couple of options to focus it. You can choose whether to favor this province or not. You do have to allocate a certain percentage of your budget to auto construction. Those are all things I haven't played around with too much myself. I don't think I've ever used the auto construct option, but it's still a useful option to know about. Like I said, I think kind of a new player friendly thing. It'll help you kind of get the hang of things more. And again, once you have a big enough amount of territory, you might reach the point where you say to yourself, I don't desire to do every building upgrade for every turn that's available, especially if you already have all the buildings selected. You might be able to get away with auto upgrades for that as well, and just have the settlement upgrade the buildings itself without having to worry about it choosing the wrong building for you. We also have a couple small changes to the magic items and ancillaries that are acquired throughout campaigns. The first change is that they can be sold. So your +8 leadership banners are actually really important to you in these campaigns now. Who would have guessed? Of course, they're not always worth too much money. It depends on the rarity and quality of the item as well. But the other change is that magic items specifically can be fused together to produce an item of higher rarity. They do have to be 2 items of the same type. So if I wanted to try to fuse a sword and a shield, it's not going to let me do that. Sword and armor, that is. And they also have to be 2 of the same rarity. So if I try to take 2 across different rarities, that will not work. But it's a nice little addition to help you get more value out of all these items that you have. When you feel like you have too many or you don't have good enough ones for the characters you're using, it might be worth the gamble to fuse them. When you do fuse things, I'm not certain that it will keep the item of the same type. And you can see right here, good, proved it for me. It's not always going to give you the same kind of item that you fused, so there's a little bit of a risk there, but it is guaranteed to give you a higher tier, like a 1 tier up on your item, so it can still be useful for some upgrades. It's a nice little addition to help you get more value out of these items, and of course, if you have, an endless list of ancillaries, it allows you the opportunity to sell them and get rid of them in order to make more room and reduce the amount of scrolling that you have to do, which is pretty nice. Now, so far all of these changes discussed have revolved entirely around the campaign map and display. I've talked about a variety of changes here, some of which are more visual and others are informative, and some which do impact the campaign gameplay itself, but there's other changes that have been made which are tied both to the campaign map and the battles, and there are some changes which really only apply within the discussion of the battlefield itself, so those are the next set of changes we're going to be looking at. One small change that they've made, which is kind of nice, is this balance of power preview we can see on the campaign map. Before I go to attack an enemy, I can get a good idea of what the game expects the balance of power to be. This is also nice for newer players who might not be familiar with all the different units from all the different rosters, and helps you determine whether you should make an attack or play it a bit safer. Even if you're not playing Immortal Empires for the first time, but you're just not familiar with every single roster across the 20 plus races that are going to be in the game, which I think is understandable, it just helps give you at a glance information about what you're going to be going up against. Now there are some bigger changes to discuss here as well, the first of which is the change to Lightning Strike and reinforcements on the battlefield. If we go into the skill tree for a Lord, we can see that Lightning Strike is a bit different than before. In Game 2, you only had a single skill point you could put into Lightning Strike, and that would allow you to deny enemy reinforcements on attack. In Game 3, we now have to put 3 points into the skill in order to get the Lightning Strike battle option in order to deny enemy reinforcements. You'll also notice that it increases reinforcement time. What does that mean? Well, in Game 2, when you started a battle where reinforcements were present, they would enter the battle immediately. If we load into the battle and we look at the deployment screen, we can see that it tells us what the reinforcement location for that enemy army will be. And if we start the battle, even if we can't see their Lord right now, we know that they're somewhere in their normal zone, but the enemy reinforcements trigger almost instantaneously and start spawning in. Now this is Game 2. However, here in Game 3, we can see that there's a little additional information on the reinforcements time for the enemies, where it tells you what their arrival time will be. This means that the enemy reinforcements don't immediately arrive to the battlefield like they did in Game 2. And although it doesn't say so on the campaign map, of course, our reinforcements take some time to arrive as well, so we can see the location and the time it will take before reinforcements arrive. We also, in Game 3, have the ability to actually change where our reinforcements are going to arrive from. But as you can see, this does affect the time it will take them to arrive to the battlefield, so use it with caution. But if you think that, a small adjustment would make a big factor in change in your battle, it's definitely worth considering, and it's just something useful to know about. So of course that means that the skill then for increasing the reinforcement time required for enemy troops is going to increase by 25% at the first level, 50% at the second level, and then at the third level, even if you choose not to Lightning Strike, you'll still get that bonus 50% delay on the enemy reinforcement arrival time. Another big change to the game is in regards to the Winds of Magic. In this game you now have a cap on your Winds of Magic. Aside from certain exceptions, you will only ever get up to 100 Winds of Magic for an army. It's now much more dependent on the strength of the Winds of Magic in the army. You no longer have skills or traits to boost the cap directly. In Game 2, you could get Lord and Hero traits which would increase your global Winds of Magic cap. If we look here at the Celestial Wizard, we can see one of the options from this trait is Winds of Magic Power Reserve +5, all armies faction-wide. I say options, they both apply, but so this means that every hero with this trait gives +5 Winds of Magic Reserve to all the armies in the game. And we can see here from the power bar, base, power, region are typical effects, but then we also have 35 from characters. There's also items and followers. And if we go into the skill tree of the hero itself, we can also see that heroes have a skill that will actually boost their Winds of Magic Power Reserve. In Game 3, these skills have been reworked to increase the amount of Winds of Magic Reserve you get when you are in an area that's causing it to increase. So like I said, paying attention to the strengths of Winds of Magic in that region is a lot more important. You can see they're strong here, which means we get +5 per turn, plus with our spellcaster's little bonus that brings it up to +6. Also means that channeling stance is actually a lot more powerful than it used to be, because generating that amount of Winds of Magic power for sure for an army is going to help keep your Winds of Magic power at its maximum level. So you have a lot more concern with the Winds of Magic in an area, and you have some traits that'll help you push towards favorable conditions, but you don't have as direct of a way of increasing your capacity for it in your baseline anymore. In Game 2, your Winds of Magic recharge rate in battle was based on how much total Winds of Magic you had available in reserves. In Game 3, it's just a steady rate of 1 point every 9 seconds, though of course if you get something like Arcane Conduit on your spellcaster, you can get an increase, or certain items and different abilities can also give you a slight increase to your recharge rate, but other than that, it's a steady value. Now when talking about battles specifically, there's one smaller change that they made which I want to touch on quickly here, and that is that they've added a hotkey for character abilities. Previously in Game 2, you could only use hotkeys and shortcuts for spell casting on characters. So we've got the Lash of Slaanesh, it says Alt-1 there, so without clicking on it, I can hold Alt, press 1, and now I have the ability to cast the spell. In Game 3, we have the same thing with character abilities by pressing Shift. So you can see if I wanted to use my Willing Prey debuff, I could press Shift and 3, and then I can select a target there. So it gives you hotkey options for both your character abilities in addition to the spellcasting abilities which you had previously. Just a nice little quality of life feature that once you get the hang of it, can be pretty effective to use. Now probably the biggest change we've seen to battle specifically is the addition of minor settlement battles. In Game 2 you only had 2 battle types, land and siege battles. A siege battle in Game 2 was anytime you attacked a province capital or a Tier 3 settlement that also had a Tier 3 garrison building built in it. All others, including battles at settlements which didn't have an upgraded garrison building in Game 2, would be land battles. In Game 3, you now have the additional settlement battle type, and these will occur at basically any point where you are attacking or defending a settlement. Even a Tier 1 settlement with no defensive building will still lead to a settlement battle. This means, at least for now, land battles will only happen when 2 armies meet on an open field. Now, they've said they're going to change how this works to get more land battles and fewer settlement battles. It was supposed to happen last update, and it was supposed to happen when Immortal Empires releases. I don't think we have the exact details on how that will be working yet, and I don't think it's coming with Immortal Empires from what we've seen, but hopefully in the future. There is the Tier 3 settlement plus Tier 3 garrison building that works in Game 3 to create a siege battle instead of a minor settlement battle, but anything in between that will be a settlement battle. These have a whole set of unique mechanics of their own. I'll get into them a little bit here, but it might be worth checking out some other people's videos that are a little bit more specific and detailed on how these work. But basically, we've got a settlement here. This one isn't necessarily 360 degrees, but multiple attack angles. You've got different supply locations, and we're just going to start the battle. And you can see they're tied to different points. So what will happen is you can spend what's called supplies in order to build towers or other fortifications. If we look at this, we can see it's got 2 towers and a barricade slot. So what happens with the barricades, they can build a little wall for their archers to stand on and shoot from, or they can just build a blockade to prevent you from coming through. They can make a little building that gives them buffs. There's also multiple levels of towers. You can see we've got like a level 1 tower here, but different races have different towers. You can get upgraded to like piercing bolts or explosive bolts, cannons, magical bolts, all sorts of different stuff. So but all of these things are bought with defensive supplies. You start a battle with a set amount of defensive supplies, and then for each control point that you have, you gain those supplies. Of course, since I'm the attacker, I don't gain those supplies if I take this point, but I'll get some passive buffs, and I will automatically destroy all the buildings that they have. And we can see they're actually setting up a barricade right here, so we can get a good example of that. You can see this is it's pretty simple. This is one where they could set some archers on there or whatever kind of troops, but you can see their troops can freely pass through this, whereas ours are going to have to destroy it or walk around it. You have to be a little careful of that because it can make pathfinding challenging if you're trying to attack, this unit right now. My troops would try to walk all the way around. So you got to be careful about targeting defenses when you can if you're trying to push through them. But yeah, so you can see there's also a capture point here in the center, and you can see this actually gives them a passive bonus. Affected units inside a fort with hit points greater than 25% have additional 15% melee defense and 10 leadership. So capturing this central point in a settlement battle is a pretty big deal. However, it won't actually engage the victory countdown. That only happens in siege battles. You do still need to effectively win the game through army losses, but of course, taking away a 10 leadership bonus and a melee defense buff helps a lot. By the time you get there, you'll probably have already gotten pretty close to it. But so that's how minor settlement battles work. Obviously quite a bit different from a land battle, not quite the same as a siege battle. And of course, siege maps have been reworked slightly in this game as well, and we're going to see more of that in Immortal Empires when we can get to that. But for now, that is an overview of the minor settlement battles. Again, you might want to check out other videos as well to get some further details or see more of these in action. Obviously, I'm not really demonstrating how this works in full effect here, but just know that this is what exists. This is how they work now. Kind of described the different ways that you get access to minor settlement battles, which is most of the time, unless it's land or a capital or a tier 3 settlement with a tier 3 garrison. So, with that being said, that covers pretty much everything I wanted to for this video. There's definitely going to be things that I missed, and there's also a few topics that I left out which I'm just not well informed enough on at this time to speak too much about. That would be things like the range of balance changes that have been made to try and make melee units more viable. A lot of that we're seeing in the stat rebalancing for units from the old games for Immortal Empires, and we've seen that in the multiplayer previews, which of course I don't have access to because I'm not at that level. We are also starting to see streams coming out today as I'm recording this. There's also been changes to how vassals work, but I haven't spent enough time as factions where I would get more experience with those updated mechanics, and I also haven't made enough effort to interact with those mechanics. You may have noticed from some of the clips that I have a Slaanesh campaign that I've been playing, but haven't got far enough in it to feel like I can adequately discuss it. From what it seems like though, they've made it so that, in order to interact with the vassals, you essentially have to interact with their leader, right? You have to declare war, form like military alliances and functions like that with their leader. You can't, have a military ally of yours attack your vassal and then end up going to war with you. So it sounds like they've straightened some of that stuff out, but again, I haven't tested it quite enough, so I can't speak as much to that. So there is a couple of things that I will have missed, but I hope you enjoyed this video and you learned some new things about the new game. There's a lot of changes between Game 2 and Game 3, and there's certainly still more to come. I'm looking forward to Immortal Empires coming out, and I'm sure you all are as well, so I'm hoping that this information and discussion helps you understand more of the features that have been changed, updated, and added in Game 3, and that you feel better prepared for committing to Game 3 in a couple of weeks when Immortal Empires launches. If you did enjoy this video, please remember to like and subscribe, and if you have more information on some of these topics that I might have missed, or things that I said I'm not as sure about, or if you have questions on topics that I did already discuss, I would love to hear from you in the comments section below. As always, thanks for watching, have a great day, and we'll see you on the next one.